Okay, so here we go. I neglected to talk about brushes a little bit. I wanted to do that. I have one here. This one's called, it's a flat brush. And this one is about 3/4 of an inch. It's not a full inch. I don't think you can see this. Hang on. So if we have it, here is the inch from here to here, and this one's considered a 3/4. An inch to a 3/4. I prefer a 3/4 because I think that they are handy dandy. And then this one is also a flat brush. And the difference between this flat brush and this filbert is that the filbert has, let's see if I can get this so you guys can see. Oh, go that way. Well, there. The filbert, oh, good gracious. The filbert has a rounded edge. Where am I? There we go. Rounded edge, where the flat is straight across. So the rounded edges on a filbert. Okay, so flat, filbert. I haven't used a filbert in a while. I don't often have them at my disposal, and so I don't often use them. But if you have one, they're pretty handy at not getting a hard edge because that edge is not there. And then these are round brushes. So this is a 10, an 8, and a 4. And so, oh, 6, my bad. That's a 6. So a 10, an 8, and a 6. And then this one's a smaller one. And I like these sizes. They're my favorite. And then you have a fan brush, which is kind of popular. And we will use it. I usually don't use this for watercolor, but I wanted to show it to you. And then a regular old toothbrush, preferably cleaned out. This one has been never used on anyone's teeth. I usually buy them by the bulk, and then I use them and they look really bad, but they are a really handy tool. And then we have what is called a palette knife. And the palette knife is a pretty handy, where am I going? Yeah, pretty handy tool. This one is, what's nice about it is it's not actually sharp. I'm trying to get used to where I'm at in the camera here. It's not really sharp, but it is very flexible. And so I use it for mixing paints, usually acrylics, but for the watercolor technique today, this is going to be for scraping. And it's also a bruising tool, but we'll use it another time here. So I'm going to move all this aside. Okay, and the last project I had you do was using the wet on wet with a wet on dry initially, showing that when you do a wet on dry, the dry does not move as much. So once it's got down into the paper, you can't hardly move it. But if you use a wet on wet wash, they're pretty nice. And these are the dried, this is the copy paper version, cold press paper version. Then you have the graded washes, going from dark to light, and the varied wash, watercolor paper, copy paper. The colors really came out nice on both of them. I was very pleased with them. So we're going to be using the wet on wet again wash, and I wanted you to be reminder of them. Okay, now we're moving that aside, and here we have I've got both papers again, and so I have we're going to do a dry brush. This is the cold pressed watercolor paper, and this is the copy paper. And so I just wanted you to kind of see how both papers handle, because many of you are going to be using the copy paper, and it will work fine. Cold pressed paper is pretty nice stuff, though. The brushes I'm going to be using is my round, and this round is really important when it comes to, okay, wait a minute, where am I? Okay, this round is really important when it comes to doing the dry brush, And I want you to actually learn and use the round brush to do the dry brush effect. Alright, so I'm going into my blue, and I put water in these in prep, so they're really going to come out easy. You have to be kind of careful when you get a lot of water in them, because you can actually dig the color out, and you don't want to do that. So I'm going to actually put some water in my little palette here. And now I have my color here. And so what I'm going to do is try to do a dry brush with this blue. Actually, let me add a little violet to it. I'm going to deepen it. Okay. I'm going to dry the brush off a little bit. And a dry brush is you're basically holding it on its side. And I'm taking off some of the water, and we're just going to try to drag it across the paper. It's a little wet right there. And I have a snoring dog next to me. That's my lovely Liam, my lab. Totally knocked out. Dry brush happening over here. And what I like about the cold press paper is you can really see the texture of the paper when you drag a dry brush across it. So once again, I'm going to try to, I'm holding the brush on its side. And this one takes a little bit of practice, because we're going to actually use this for a technique and a painting that we're going to be doing. So I need you to practice some dry brush. And you can see the difference in the texture, I hope. Let me look at, so we can get closer. You can see more texture in the cold pressed paper. All right, there's that. And then I'm going to show with the spatter, we're going to play with our toothbrush. So that one is going to bring this toothbrush out. Stipple is just another word for dots, and we use that in pen work. So I use both words a lot of times. You'll hear me interchange them. Like I'll say, please add stipple. I'm talking more in pen and ink. And then spattering is what we all know for doing something with paint. So I figured both words here I use them, I interject them both. Okay, I use them both. Okay, so I'm going to do, here's my color. And actually, let's create another color. Let's try some green. Oops, I got a messy here. And I'm going to do some yellow. So I'm basically pulling out my palette. I'll make a yellow-green because I contaminated that one. So I've got a green and a yellow-green. Alright, now I'm going to take and this toothbrush is dry. And you can see I'm holding it like this. Oh, get in the picture. There we go. And I'm going to use my thumb like this. And what I usually do is I point my thumb directly downwards, and then I just flick like this. Okay. So when I do spatter, though, I don't want this to go all over the place. So what I will do is I will sometimes use paper to block where I'm painting. And I like this paper. It's ripping rather nicely. And I will block in because I don't want it going all over my paper. So I'm going to take some effort here. And one thing I wanted to show you is the difference between adding it to dry and to a wet area. Okay, so I am going to get this side wet. I am going to lift some of that water so it's not too wet. Okay. Alright, I'm going to put my toothbrush into the blue. You can dab a little off if you want to. And then I'm just going to turn it up and splatter. be able to see when it's wet, it's going to spread out some. And when it's dry, it stays in nice little dots. And it just really depends on how you're using it, where you want to use it. That is on the copy paper. Let's try this again on the cold pressed. Once again, I'm just going to lay this on here. Kind of blocking it in. What if I do? There we go. Oh, I made that one big, didn't I? Here we go. Okay. Wet this area. This is the cold pressed watercolor paper. And again, get it wet, and then I'm going to lift some of the water off so it's not quite so soggy. And I'm going to load that brush, the toothbrush, and I'm going to again flicking downward. And this one is pretty drastic in the difference. Watercolor paper behaves nicely. I am going to do a 2-color, so I'm going to grab some of this green. I would want you to mask it to show that, masking the area off just to show that you understand the concept of how to mask. You can also use it in fun ways where you could actually create some ground, and then you could actually rip the paper in such a way that you have like an actual, I don't know, mountain or shape. Like something like that. And then you could lay that in the picture. Off where I don't want it to go. So stipple can be used to create, and I am going to do the yellow-green. I dried my brush a little bit, and I'm just going to throw the yellow-green over where I put my little piece of paper here. You can see that it's left a design. And whoop, go in this way. Alright. Now scraping is a really interesting technique. We're going to do, and I'm not always successful at it, but I'm going to make every attempt here. I'm going to add a little red over here. And I use a palette knife for this. Again, you may not have a palette knife at home. You can use something that's, I guess, just a, I don't know, back of your brush maybe? I guess you can use it, or I guess you could use maybe a ruler would do it. Something that has like a kind of a nice edge on it that will drag, so I'll try the ruler too. Alright, so I'm going to do, with the watercolor paper, I'm just going to do scraping, add the watercolor. I'm going to do a varied wash. May have gotten this a little wet. I'm lifting some of the color out, and then I'm going to scrape across it. So I'm just basically going to and you can move the color around, and it leaves lines in there. Scraping. let's put that one aside, and I will use the ruler for this other one. Scraping. Once again, I'm going to do a varied wash, getting you used to the vocabulary. I'm going to try using this for ruler. A little tougher, and it's soaked into this copy paper. You might have a tough time getting it to show up, but we're going to try. We'll add a little more red, a little deeper color. Maybe that will help. We'll do a little more color. And there goes my varied wash. There we go. Alright, a little more color, and now I'm going to scrape. I'm just going to use the end of it. This is not a technique I use very often, but it can come in handy for certain applications, and so it is a useful technique, and it is one you should recognize and know. So going this way so you can see it. So this is scraping. Oh, there we go. All right. And then we're going to do lifting. Now, I did write wet on wet here because I wanted to make sure that you knew. You remember, if you have a wet on dry is going to mean you're not going to be able to move that once it's in the paper. So you will need a wet on wet anytime you're trying to lift. It is difficult to get it to come out if you are working with dry paper. So I'm just getting the paper wet. And I think I'm just going to go with a nice brown. Just putting the color on here. And so to lift, I'm going to get my brush clean, slightly wet, and I'm going to attempt to lift that color off. Notice I'm going over it several times. It's not wanting to lift here very well, but this is the strangest thing about. Sometimes I can do this and a lift and you can easily see the lift. And other times it's harder to see. So where am I? There I am. And it is a line right here. It's a curve. Okay. I've got to get used to this camera. Move it over. Alright, let's try again. On the cold pressed paper. Watercolor paper does lend itself better to these techniques. It's just made for it. So you can see with a wet on wet, you're going to get a nicer blend. It's going to soften. Now I'm kind of cleaning out my brush, and I'm just going to go in and lift. And I'm lifting that color off. And this is used for either creating a design like I'm doing right now, or a correction in case you needed to pull a color out. But again, it doesn't work as well when you've already put the color down onto the dry paper. So that's lifting. Alright, and again, a little harder to see on the copy paper, but it's there and I will be able to see it, so you'll need to show me an example. And again, I could try going a little darker. Let's see if I can do a black over this. We're just going to experiment. We're going to go black over the brown, and let's see if I can lift enough to see. So I'm glazing this black over the top of the brown. And I'm going to see if I can lift enough for you to see the brown through. That's working. Okay, a little better. It's much better at your control when you go to lift using a paintbrush rather than the teacher method that some teachers have taught in the past, where they're basically going, okay, take this wad and lift, and what happens is you don't have control of what's happening back here, and it will damage your paper. You'll spread the paint. So I would not use a paper napkin or anything for lifting. I would use it for blotting, however, which is what I'm going to do now. So we're going to blot on the watercolor, the copy paper. And there's two methods to blotting. There's an additive method and a subtractive method. Now think about it. Additive means that you're going to add it to the paper. And you'll notice this says dry. And the subtractive method is wet on wet. So I'm going to get the paper wet. And I'm going to use this purple and violet. Lay that color on here, on the wet on wet. And then I'm going to wad up that paper into kind of a neat design here, and I'm just going to blot it off. And I didn't go fast enough. This paper, this copy paper is quick. So what I'm going to do, once again, go with black, go over the top, and then I'm going to move a lot faster, and I'm going to take it off while it's still wet. Let's see if I can actually subtract it where you can see the color through. Alright, let's try our watercolor paper. And again, I'll be able to tell the technique you've tried. I know it's frustrating on a copy paper, and again, it's nice to have good materials. So the cold pressed watercolor paper is a lot easier to work with. Alright, so wet on wet. So I'm going to add the water, lift a little bit so it's not sopping wet. Add the color. Notice I'm using my palette. I'm not coming right out of here, out of that original color. Some interesting texture. That's subtractive, because basically the color's on there and you're taking it away. Now the additive's fairly easy. Now I've got this wet paper, and I'm going to use it dry, and I'm just going to dip it right into here. I'm going to make a varied wash here, and then I'm just going to dip it in it, soaking my paper up, and just blot it on. Now, can you go over another color? Absolutely. You can blot over another color. You could have a nice wash of a light color and then blot over it. Let's do a little green just for the fun of it. Okay, so that is the additive method of blotting. Here, let me see, wait a minute. Come on. Oh dear. Hang on, folks. Don't make me, I'm trying not to make you dizzy. Okay, so we've got the additive and the subtractive. Okay, and then I'll do it real quick here. And again, we'll just grab what I got. I'm totally going to just mix these up. We're going to get a varied blot additive method there. Those are the two. Those are the ones. Dry brush, spatter, scraping, lifting, blotting, subtractive and additive, and those are the ones I'd like you to do next. Thank you.